afternoon. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Sunday, Yom Rishon. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Sharon in steamy Lebanon, New Jersey. It is getting hot around the country now that it is summer. John in Maine, Bella in Florida, Joe in the Inland Empire. Bet it's a little warm there. Joseph, I've invited some friends and they're so impressed with the teachings here. Thank you so much, Joseph. Great to spread the word. Randy in Florida, Marjorie in Georgia, Ilanit in Silver Spring. Welcome, everybody. And thank you for tuning in at a special time for a Sunday, noon Pacific, because Nina and I have to be at the encore screening of our movie Guns N' Moses this evening. Second screening in the LA Jewish Film Festival. If you're in the LA area, 4 p.m. at the Lemley Town Center 5 in Encino. Our daf today, and we're picking it up right near the very top of page 114 on Amud Aleph. So it's on the A side of the page. And we are continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 12 here in chapter 9. A dilemma was raised before the sages. What is the law? What is the halacha with regard to making arrangements for the debtor? I call that this Mishnah is about a creditor who is owed money by a borrower. Can he seize collateral? Can he seize it inside the house, only from outside the house? Maybe he can't seize it all. Only an agent of the court can seize it for him. What kind of collateral can be seized? The Torah says if you take his garment or his upper or lower millstone, or, you have to return those so that he can either, live in a garment or do his work on a daily basis. And so then yesterday, at the end of yesterday, we were talking about, what if he has something very expensive? Can you not force him to sell that and make do with a less expensive object so that he can make good on his debt? And it seems no, because, if you're talking about you can't take away someone's cloak, and even it's a very expensive cloak, well, Jews are descendant from royalty, as we consider Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah to be. So any garment is a fit garment for that person. Now, a dilemma was raised before the sages. What is the law with regard to making arrangements for the debtor so that he will retain some of his possessions, so that he may continue living as before, right, in the style to which he was accustomed, albeit at a slightly lower standard? So the issue on which this is based is whether or not a verbal analogy is derived from the usage of the term poor, as in a poor person, that is written in the context of valuations, right? Erechin vows, where a person vowed to give his value as a number of shekels, depending on your gender and age, as a donation to the temple. No one forced you to do that. But if you decided that the amount that you would set would be your Erechin value, okay, well then you made a pledge to the temple. And now, if you're not paying it off, the temple can come and seize some of your property as collateral to make you pay that pledge. And as we see, there's a different standard applied, whether a person is poor or not. So are we going to extend this definition of poor to what kinds of things are going to be taken away from a person or not? So continuing. So the question is whether or not we apply this verbal analogy derived from the usage of the word poor, written in the context of a debtor in Leviticus 25:35, and the term poor written in the context of valuations, Leviticus 27:8, as the Gemara will explain further. So the Gemara suggests, come and hear a proof. As Ravin sent a message in his letter from Eretz Yisrael, right, from the community of sages in the land of Israel to the community in Bava, in Babylonia. So I asked all my teachers concerning this matter, but they did not tell me anything. But there was this question concerning a similar matter that I heard them discuss with regard to one who says, it is incumbent upon me to bring 100 dinars for the temple maintenance, right? In other words, he's making a vow to give a gift to the temple. And that reminds me that I made a pledge yesterday in synagogue to make a donation. So I'm making myself a note to pay that off as soon as I finish this class. So with regard to one who says it is incumbent upon me to bring 100 dinars for the temple maintenance, what is the law as to whether they make arrangements for him? Meaning he didn't pay, what kind of arrangements are they going to make to force him to fulfill his pledge? Although an arrangement is explicitly taught only with regard to the specific type of donation known as erechin vows, those valuations is what we're translating that as, is it applicable here as well to a free will pledge made just some amount that you chose, not based on the valuation specified in the Torah? So Rabbi Yaakov in the name of Bar Pada and Rabbi Yirmiyah in the name of in the name of Ilfa, each say, it is a kal v'chomer inference, an a fortiori inference from the laws of a debtor. And if for a debtor, a borrower, to whom one returns his collateral, they do not make arrangements for the payment of his debt, then in the case of consecration, where they do not return his collateral, is it not logical that they should not make arrangements for the payment of his debt? And Rabbi Yochanan says, it is written, when a man shall clearly utter a vow according to your valuation. In this verse, all vows of consecrated property are juxtaposed to valuations, teaching that just as they make arrangements for the payment of a debt with regard to valuations, so too they make arrangements for the payment of a debt with regard to any vow of consecration. So the Gemara asks, and what do the other sages, i.e. Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Yirmiyah, derive from this juxtaposition between vows and valuations? And the Gemara replies, they maintain that this juxtaposition comes to teach the law that a vow of consecration is judged by its significance. Meaning, if one stated a vow of valuation concerning a vital part of his body, for example, that he will donate the value of his heart, so then he is obligated to pay not only the value of that organ, but the valuation of his entire self. Consequently, the phrase, a vow according to your valuation, indicates that just as valuations are judged by their significance, so too consecrated property is judged by its significance. And the Gemara asks, but they should make arrangements for a debtor based on a kal v'chomer inference from the laws of valuation as follows. And just before we go on, when he said something significant like your heart, this would be as opposed to your foot. Now you would say, I consider my foot to be pretty significant. I don't want to lose my foot. God forbid. But what they're saying is, if you spoke in the language of, I hereby consecrate the value of my heart as a pledge to make a donation to the Holy Temple, then that is treated as if you said, I make a valuation of myself. Because you and your heart are indivisible. Without your heart, you cannot live. But if you spoke, and this would be weird language, but no one would ever speak this way. But if you did, what would be the significance? And so if you said, I hereby, bli neder, I'm just talking about for a teaching example, pledge to give as a donation the value of my foot, then that would be considered insignificant and you didn't pledge anything at all. Why? Because your foot is not indispensable to you. God forbid you lost a foot, you could continue to live. And that's the difference between the heart and a foot. And that's why the heart is, in this context, in this legal context, considered significant, whereas the foot is not. So now the Gemara asks, but they should make arrangements for a debtor based on the kal v'chomer inference from the laws of valuations, like this. And if, in the case of valuations, the law is that they do not return his collateral, and yet they do make arrangements for the payment of his debt, then with regard to a debtor, where the law is that one does return his collateral, is it not logical that they should make arrangements for the payment of his debt? And the Gemara responds, the verse states, but if he is too poor for your valuation, and the priest shall value him according to the means of the one that vowed, shall the priest value him. So the Torah emphasizes that this halacha is applicable only to he who makes a valuation, but not to a debtor. Bottom line, what they're saying is if somebody made a valuation vow, right? In other words, he said, I hereby pledge to give as a donation to the temple my erechin, right? My value, my erech value. So that would mean, like, let's say the Torah, I forget the number, but let's say the Torah specifies that for a person of his age and gender, it's 50 shekels, and he doesn't have 50 shekels because he's poor. Then the priest steps in and evaluates him according to his means of paying. So he won't have to pay the full 50 shekels. He spoke, rashly. It's not a vow that he's really going to be able to fulfill, and he doesn't have to fulfill it because he is poor. And that's why we're using, so we're borrowing from that aspect of the law to say, well, are we saying that valuations are less stringent than standard debts, or equally stringent or more stringent? And that's why we're comparing that this idea of being poor can get you excused from the consecrated value. It's not necessarily going to get you excused from paying a regular debt, though it might apply to what kind of collateral is seized. Now, the Gemara asks, and according to the other opinion, which maintains that they do make arrangements for a debtor, meaning collateral is seized, how is the word he interpreted? And the Gemara answers, this word teaches that the law does not apply unless he remains in his state of poverty from the beginning to the end. If he was rich at the outset, or he grew wealthy at some later stage, arrangements are not made for him. So the Gemara asks an additional question, and once it is established that arrangements are not made for a debtor, they should return the collateral in the case of consecration based on the Kal V'chomer inference from the laws of a debtor. And if in the meaning like this, and if in the case of a debtor where they do not make arrangements for him, the creditor nevertheless returns his collateral, right? This idea that if he's poor, you return his collateral to him at night in the case of a pillow, or you return his collateral to him by day in the case of a millstone. That's what the arrangements is referring to there. And if in the case of a debtor where they do not make arrangements for him, the creditor nevertheless returns his collateral. So with regard to consecration, where they do make arrangements for the payment of his debt, is it not logical that they should return his collateral to him? So the Gemara answers, the verse states, with regard to a regular loan, you shall restore to him the collateral, and he will sleep in his garment, and he will bless you. This excludes consecration, where there is no need for a blessing, and therefore it is not included in the laws of returning the collateral, right? In other words, when a lender returns the garment or the millstone of a poor person that owes him money, it's considered righteousness for the lender. When in a case of consecration, where the money is owed to the temple treasury, there's no ascribing this attribute of righteousness to the temple. The temple is a representative of God on earth, in essence, and obviously God is righteous, so that we just don't apply that term. Right? It doesn't mean that God is not righteous, that temple is not righteous. It means that it is not an applicable term in that context. And the Gemara is puzzled by this claim, and is consecrated property not in need of a blessing? But isn't it written, and you shall eat and be satisfied and bless the Lord your God, indicating that consecrated property also requires a blessing? Rather, the reason is that the verse states with regard to the restoration of collateral, and it shall be righteousness for you, which is referring to caring for one who requires charity, and this excludes consecrated property, which does not require charity. New subject. The Gemara relates, Rabba bar Avu found Elijah, right? So Eliyahu Hanavi, the prophet Elijah, standing in a graveyard of Gentiles. So an unusual place to have a meeting with Elijah the prophet. Now, for those who are unfamiliar with this, Elijah appears in many places in the Talmud. And we're not talking about conversations that somebody had with Elijah when Elijah was living and prophesying in Israel, in ancient times. but rather that, the soul of Elijah returns to earth from time to time and would appear to the sages and answer halachic questions for them because they were at such a high level. They weren't prophets, but there is near prophecy in the sense that Elijah would appear to them and grant them insight into various Jewish, legal questions, halachic questions. And very interesting here that not only did Elijah appear to Rabba bar Avu, but that he appeared to him while standing in a Gentile cemetery. So interesting setting, and it will be relevant to the question. So Rabba bar Avu said to him, what is the law with regard to making arrangements for the debtor that we've been talking about back and forth? So Elijah said to him, a verbal analogy is derived from the usage of the term poor, written in the context of a debtor, and the term poor, written in the context of valuations for donations, consecrated donations given to the temple. So with regard to valuations, it is written, but if he is too poor, mach, for your valuation, then the priest shall evaluate him. And we're talking about a priest. Because he does the evaluating. And with regard to a creditor, it is written, but if your brother be poor, yamuch, in Leviticus 25:35, that's where you have to arrange to return the collateral to him when he needs it for his sustenance. So now, in other words, we got an answer from Elijah. It's the answer that we just heard a moment ago. So it's like Elijah's confirming it, since there was a lot of debate and back and forth among the sages. But now that he's got Elijah in a conversation, Rabba bar Avu asks him another question. From where is it derived with regard to a naked person that he may not separate teruma, right? So in other words, when you are involved in a holy activity, like separating the first tithe, right, the 2% that would go to a priest known as teruma, when the temple was standing and a farmer's growing produce in Israel, so he separates teruma, and then he chooses a priest to give it to. But when he is consecrating that portion of his produce that's going to go to a priest, even though he's in a state of ritual purity and the produce is in a state of ritual purity, he can't separate that produce if he himself is undressed. He can't do that if he's naked. He also can't do it if he's standing in the presence of a naked person. And by the way, you can't pray in the presence of a naked person. You can't pray in the presence of excrement. You can't pray in the presence of a toilet. All these matters are considered unseemly and inappropriate to do something holy like prayer or consecrating produce as teruma. Okay, so the question is, we know that that's true. From where is it derived? Is what Rabba bar Avu is asking Elijah the prophet. And Elijah replied, as it is written, and he see no unseemly thing in you. Deuteronomy 23:15. And this verse indicates that one may not recite any words of sanctity, including the blessing upon separating teruma, in front of one who is naked. So that was the answer to that question. And now Rabba bar Avu asks a different question. And he said to him, is not the master a priest? What is the reason that the master is standing in a cemetery? It's a very interesting question. So the general law is that a priest, a Cohen, cannot enter a cemetery. That's still to this day. And why? So a Cohen, right, a priest was held to a higher standard of purity overall than other members of the Jewish people. And he would only become impure for immediate members of his family, I think his parents, his wife, his child, if they die. Otherwise, he doesn't walk into a cemetery. Why does this apply to Elijah? Was Elijah a Cohen? We have no definitive proof of that. We are told that Elijah was from Gilead, right? And the temple, the Mishkan stood in Gilead for some time. So that might be an indicator that he might have been a Cohen, but there's no definitive proof of that. Not only that, Elijah is, not alive at the time that Rabbi Abba was having this conversation with him. Although maybe Elijah never died, right? Because he was taken straight up to heaven. He didn't die on earth. He was just taken straight to heaven. So in that sense, maybe he is still alive. And he's just somebody who is able to travel between heaven and earth in order to make these appearances. Okay, so then another reason that we wonder about this, discussion about this, is because Elijah revived a child, right, who was dead, and Elijah revived that child by coming into contact, physical contact with the dead child. So if he was a priest, how could he come into contact with a corpse, which would not be permitted? So it must be that he wasn't a priest. But on that point of argument, the sages would answer, well, Elijah knew with certainty through prophecy that he would be able to revive that child. So in that sense, the child was not considered a corpse, since in Elijah's, inner self, he knew that he would be able to revive the child. He didn't come into contact with a corpse. Plus, for matters of life and death, all halachas, get thrown out if you're able to save a life. At any rate, the question is, there's reason to have there's reason to ask, was Elijah a priest or not? And if indeed he was a priest and he's still alive, then what's he doing standing in a cemetery? Right. So that's the question that Rabbi Bar Abu asks him. So Elijah said to him, has the master not studied the Mishnaic order of Taharos? Right, Taharos, like the way we take care of bodies after they have died, before they're interred, before they're buried. So in that tractate, we learn, as it is taught in a Baraisa, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says that the graves of Gentiles do not render one impure, as it is stated, and from Ezekiel 34:31, and you, my sheep, the sheep of my pasture, are Adam, right? Adam. So Adam is a word for both earth and for man, like generally man, human beings. So is this saying that that the Talmud does not consider non-Jews to be human beings? 100% false. And that's the kind of thing where, enemies of the Jewish people would take a law out of context and use it as an accusation against the Jews, right? But with regard to this idea that Gentiles are not called Adam, the Ramban in Tractate Yevamos explains at length that this does not mean that Gentiles are not called man at all, as certain verses in Scripture clearly refer to Gentiles as Adam, right, as men. So rather, since in this context the word man, Adam, is used in reference to Jews alone, apparently the term applies only to Jews with regards to portions of halacha, Jewish law, in the Torah. And Rabbeinu Tam demonstrates that there is a difference between the term man, Adam, which indicates only Jews when we're talking about questions of halacha, and the term ha-Adam, the man, which applies to all people, Gentile and Jew alike. So either way, everyone agrees that the discussion about the term man, Adam, here is a technical one in the context of this particular law about whether the graves of Gentiles render someone impure or not, the way that the graves of Jews do. Right? So we are always making distinctions. It's interesting, we just had a halakhic question that came up in our synagogue today about toiveling, immersing vessels, through water when you purchase them, right? So a vessel that is either a gift or is purchased from a non-Jew that enters a Jewish home has to be immersed in the mikvah before it can be used in the kitchen of a Jew. And that we learn that out from in the wilderness, where the Jews had a war with the Midianites and then brought certain metal objects back whether they were kitchen utensils or jewelry or swords and spears, they had to be toiveled before they could be used by the Jewish people. And this is because there's a distinction of the domain of the non-Jews and the domain of the Jews. There's nothing prejudicial about that. It's just that we require certain laws to be fulfilled when things pass from the non-Jewish world into the Jewish world. And likewise, there's distinctions like that about the graves of Gentiles and not Gentiles. And so that question came up when Elijah is standing in a cemetery, and there would be no question, even if he was a priest, if he was standing in the cemetery of non-Jews compared to a cemetery of Jews. But even this story does not serve as dispositive proof that Elijah was a priest. Rabba bar Abu said to him, so the question that Elijah asked him is, why aren't you familiar with these laws that I've just asked you about from Mishnaic order to Taharos? So Rabba bar Abu said to Elijah, how could I be familiar with that Baraisa? If I cannot be proficient in the more commonly studied 4 orders of the Mishnah, how could I be knowledgeable in all 6? And Elijah said to him, why are you not learned in all of them? And Rabba bar Abu said to him, well, the matter of a livelihood is pressing for me, and I am therefore unable to study properly. He just hasn't had enough time to memorize the 6 orders of the Mishnah. So Elijah led him and brought him into Gan Eden. Right? So Elijah took Rabba bar Abu up to Gan Eden, up to heaven, the Garden of Eden, and said to him, remove your cloak, gather up and take some of these leaves that are lying around. So Rabba bar Abu gathered up some leaves and took them in his cloak. When he was exiting, right, leaving Gan Eden and returning to our world, he heard a voice that declared, who else consumes his world to come like Rabba bar Abu, who takes his merit of the next world for his use in the present one? Very mystical, esoteric story and teaching here. So we have this idea that, everything that happens in this world is going to affect what our portion, what our chelik is in Olam Haba, in the world to come. If for some reason you are given access to the higher world, right, like this gift of Elijah bringing Rabba bar Abu up to the next world and saying, take some of these leaves back with you, then those leaves, as we'll see, can do him enormous good in this world. If you're able to bring something down from the upper world, it can do enormous benefit for you in this world. But it's almost like cheating. It would give you so much benefit in this world that you would lose some of the merit that you would otherwise carry into the next world, because this world was hard, because you had hardship, because you suffered, because you toiled, because you managed to learn and set a schedule for learning, even though you were so busy making a living. That would end up accruing to your merit and get you a higher portion in the next world when when your life ends in this world and you go to that next world. And so Rabba bar Abu realized that he was going to somehow diminish his eventual eternal portion in the next world because he was getting this, gift that Elijah was allowing to take some leaves back from Gan Eden into his life. So he heard that voice. What did he do? He spread out his cloak and he threw away the leaves. He didn't want to cheat like that. So even so, when he brought his cloak back, he discovered that the cloak had absorbed such a good aroma from the leaves of the Garden of Eden that he was able to sell it for 12,000 dinars. We talked about yesterday how extreme, and let's say hyperbolic it would be to say that one single garment would be worth 10,000 dinars. Well, here you go. Rabba bar Abu was able to sell his cloak for 12,000 dinars. Why? Because it had absorbed the scent of heaven. And like anybody who came into contact with that cloak would be so blown away by it that they'd pay anything. And so if he could take it before a king, who had a treasury with so much money, he could sell it for 12,000 dinars. And he was able to do that. Since, however, Rabba bar Abu knew that this was taken from his portion in the world to come, he did not want to benefit from it himself, and he therefore divided the sum among his sons-in-law. Presumably he only had daughters, so he gave this away to his sons-in-law. And that ends that story. Now the sages taught with regard to the verse, if he be a poor man, you shall not sleep with his collateral. Right? You have to return it for him so that he can sleep in his cloak and not be cold. But if he is wealthy, then one may lie down, meaning you don't have to return it to him. So what is the Tana saying? Rav Sheshes said that this is what he's saying. And if he be a poor man, you shall not sleep while his collateral is with you. Rather, you must restore it to him before the sun sets. But if he is a wealthy man, you may lie down while his collateral is with you. The sages taught one who lends money to another is not permitted to take collateral from him and is not obligated to return it to him and transgresses all... One who lends money to another is not permitted to take collateral from him and is not obligated to return it to him and transgresses all of these labels of prohibitions. So the meaning of this baraisa is unclear. And the Gemara asks, what is the Tana saying? Rav Sheshes said this is what he is saying. One who lends money to another is not permitted to take collateral from him. But if he did take collateral from him, he is obligated to return it to him. As for the clause, and he transgresses all of these labels of prohibitions, this is referring to the latter clause, i.e. the case implicit in the baraisa, where the creditor took collateral from the debtor and did not return it, and the baraisa explains that such a person violates all the Torah prohibitions that apply to this situation. Rava said, this is what the Tana is saying, one who lends money to another is not permitted to take collateral from him. And if he did take collateral from him, he is obligated to return it to him. In what case is this statement said? It is referring to where he took collateral from him when it was not at the time of the loan, but rather as a means of ensuring payment. But if he took collateral from him at the time of the loan, which would mean they agreed at the time of the loan, I'll lend you money, but I need to take collateral, and the borrower agreed to that, in which case the collateral serves as a guarantee for the loan, then the lender is not obligated to return it to him. So according to this interpretation, the statement, and he transgresses all of these labels of prohibitions, is referring to the first clause of the baraisa concerning the prohibition against taking collateral after the loan was extended. Rav Shezevi taught the following baraisa before Rava with regard to the verse, and if you take as collateral your neighbor's garment, you shall restore it to him until the sun goes down. This is referring to a garment worn at night, and teaches that the garment is returned during the day. And with regard to the verse, you shall restore to him the collateral when the sun goes down. This is referring to a garment worn during the day. Rava said to him, this statement is puzzling, as with regard to a garment worn in the day, why do I need it at night? And as for a garment worn at night, why do I need it in the day? What purpose is served by giving back the garments at such times? And Rav Shezevi said to him, and I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Rava said to him, no, do not erase it, because this is what it is saying. With regard to the verse, you shall restore it to him until when the sun goes down. This is referring to a garment worn during the day, which may be taken as collateral by night, but must be returned to the debtor for the day. With regard to the verse, you shall restore to him the collateral when the sun goes down. This is referring to a garment worn at night, which may be taken as collateral during the day. And that concludes what we're going to be learning today, God willing. Tomorrow we'll learn together at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, and we'll continue right there at the bottom of page 114b. Okay, Nina is not able to monitor comments for me today, so let me scan. Sharon says, Elijah was living during the reign of King Ahab when only Kohanim offered sacrifices. Yet Elijah offers the famous sacrifice for the rain versus the prophets of Baal. Wouldn't that qualify him as a Kohen, as only they could perform sacrifice? A very good argument for why Elijah must have been a Kohen. But right? He offered that sacrifice not in the temple, and King Ahab lived in the time when the temple was standing. So perhaps that sacrifice was a one-time only demonstration authorized by God, as an exception, and perhaps you didn't have to be a Cohen, you only had to be a Navi to offer that. Would be the counter argument, and I guess that's why none of these arguments are dispositive, and we're not sure whether he was a Cohen or not. Joseph says, what is the logic behind the nude body being unseemly? Is it perhaps sexual propriety, avoiding idolatry, or the body itself? Maybe because God has no body. Just some speculation on my part. I mean, this idea, it's not right. It's not that the body is unseemly, but exposing it to others is considered inappropriate. Right, and so we definitely have issues of modesty. We don't even want to show unnecessary skin. Like, I wear shirt sleeves, but a lot of religious guys don't. And then when it comes to, for women, cleavage, shoulders, legs, etc., we consider that, it would be more modest, and it's inappropriate to show so much skin. How much more so actual showing, the portions of the body that are only to be seen by one's spouse, when engaged in lovemaking. So it's considered inappropriate to utter words of sanctity around nudity. Yeah, exactly, because it is sexually inappropriate to do that. Okay, and I think Ilanit says, it is said that the clothes of Adam that Asaph stole from Nimrod and kept in Rivka's tent still smelled of the fields of Gan Eden. And this smell, while Jacob wore them, made Isaac think that he smelled like Esau. Beautiful midrash. Thank you for bringing that down, Ilanit. It's interesting how, I just think it's interesting how scent is so important. There is a bracha that we will say when we're on fragrant herbage, right? Fragrant herbage. There's a bracha that you can say when you're smelling something that's especially beautiful, that is a scent that comes from plants. And you would be, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Say that properly. I, change the word so I'm not using God's name in vain. And then it's Boreis Ve'V'Samim, right? Who makes fragrant herbage. It's this smell, scent, aroma is such a strong trigger, right? Whole emotions can be triggered. You don't even know where they're coming from. And it's because a scent reminds you, right, of another time in your life, especially you can be brought back to childhood. I don't know why this came into my mind, but I had a real wonderful gift from my dad so many years ago, just shortly after college. And my father used to work in Africa for the World Bank, and he's just working in development of third world nations in Africa. And on one of his, so he was there a lot, and he brought me on one of his trips, and I was able to experience Kenya. So I flew into Nairobi. And we had some wonderful, wonderful travel within Kenya. But I just remember at that time, I'm sure it's not this way anymore, I don't know. But at that time, when you walked off the plane, it was like the old-fashioned walk down the stairs, right? And then sort of cross the tarmac, get on a bus, or just walk into the airport. But so when you walked out of the plane door, you were outside in Africa. And the airport, at least at that time, was somewhat distant from the city, and so it was like the plains of Africa were around you. And I just remember that as soon as I came out of that plane, there was a breeze, and there was this wonderful aroma, which was like the Welt. I think that's what it's called, perhaps in Afrikaans, I'm not sure, but I remember that. I think that word is in English now too, the Welt, and it's this it's just the breeze blowing over the grasslands and the animals, and it's just, wow, it was just an aroma that was so alive, just so alive, and it's something I'd never smelled in America or anywhere else before. I wasn't religious then, but I definitely got this wonderful appreciation of God's creation just from that scent trigger. Anyway, that's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Monday, at the regular Monday time